Hello and greetings from Roanoke College. I am Sally Walker, and on behalf of Roanoke College, I welcome you to our series NOKELive, as presented by the Roanoke College Alumni Association. Before we get started, please know that each of you that are joining us via YouTube, you can use the chat feature to ask questions of our presenters today. And we will attempt to get through as many of your questions as possible, and please keep them coming. We'd love for this to be a conversation. Today's event is being recorded and will be available on this YouTube channel for future viewing. A link to all of our past NOKELive events, as well as other online content, can be found on the Alumni Hub at www.roanoke.edu/alumni. So I am so excited about today's NOKELive event. We're getting a behind the scenes look at one of Roanoke's gems, the Brackety-Ack. Today is one of 2 days a month during which all of the student staff come together to work on the newspaper's layout. The whole staff is joining us, and before we get started, I'd just like to take a minute to introduce the editor, Ms. Kaylin Spickler. Kaylin is a senior communication studies major from Bridgewater, Virginia, right up the road. And in addition to working for the Brackety-Ack, Kaylin has a blind dating radio show on campus, An Hour of Dates, and her blog, Kay Has Too Much to Say. She can be found often in Commons, maybe more so pre-COVID, right, Kaylin? Seeking out the biggest corner piece of cake and searching around campus for the best sunset spot. She enjoys spending time with her friends and taking a short road trip home as much as she can to see her family. And I'm going to turn it over to Kaylin. She and Dr. Thomas Carter are joining us today. I'm going to let her introduce him and get us started. Welcome.
Thank you, Sally. So I am Kaylin, and I am the editor-in-chief of the Brackety-Ack. This is my second year as editor-in-chief. And like Sally said, today we are in layout. Layout takes place in Garrett Media Lounge, which is oftentimes used for student media like the Brackety-Ack. The magazine might also use it, and media and marketing also uses it. The computers up here have a lot of the technology needed to do some of the more creative things on campus. So right now we have 5 or 6 editors here with us, and they're all working on their pages. I can give you guys a little brief showing of that before Dr. Carter gives you the history. This is Zach. Hi. He is the Folks at Noke editor. Yeah. And this is Joyelle. Hello. She is the Culture and Wellness editor. Down here we have Devin, and she is the Opinion editor. Hi. And here we have Carissa, who is the Entertainment editor. Hey there. And then Alexis is joining us, even though she is done with her page, which is awesome because we always love to have people finish up early. So that's everybody we have here with us right now. Dr. Carter will give you guys a little bit of the history of the Brackety-Ack and the pages that we have and past issues that we have had. Oops.
Yeah. So if we could, well, first of all, my name is Tom Carter. I've been at Roanoke College since 1994, teaching journalism, mass communication. I started out teaching some of the literature courses, but as the communication program grew, I shifted over to principally communication courses and the ink courses. I've also been advisor to the Brackety-Ack pretty much since I came on campus. A little bit of footnote to history. The advisor to the paper before I came here in the first semester that I showed up was actually Mike Maxey, who's now president of the college. He was the director of admissions at the time, and the person who had been advising the paper had left rather suddenly, and so he was serving as kind of a fill-in advisor. And I think he was incredibly happy to pass it along to me. But anyway, the paper itself has been going since 1915. You can, not sure if we're up on the very first edition here.
Are you able to see my screen? I did share.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah, this is the first one.
okay. I'm just not sure what people are seeing.
They're seeing that,
Okay.
exactly.
So the first edition, kind of a classic turn of the century kind of newspaper, 4-column front there. As you can see, the newspaper has not been named yet. In fact, there's the contest here for a whole year subscription for the best name of the paper. And I'm not entirely sure what kind of value a 1-year subscription to a free newspaper happened to have been, but that's pretty much what we had. You'll also notice that it's, it's principally there as a sports sheet more than anything else. I looked through the archives a little bit over the past week or so, and I was trying to find the very first edition with the name on it, and the archives does not have a copy of that. So unfortunately, we're kind of stuck with any kind of explanation for what the nominations were, or exactly how the newspaper celebrated its new name. But our understanding, as best as we can figure it, is that the name Brackety-Ack is sort of a hark back to a lot of the novelty kinds of songs that were popular in the 19-teens. The next picture we have is from the 1920s. And again, we now have the Brackety-Ack name there. And it still looks, standard 4-column front, 1-column headlines, those kinds of things. It's still principally a sports kind of newspaper. Other kinds of articles are starting to pop in. The guest speakers coming to campus and the social functions that are going on campus. But still, it's fairly straightforward little student newspaper here. The name that you see up there at the top, the R.G. Grove, I think, or whatever it is, Grove was one of the early editors of the paper, and he had given a lot of his collection to the archives when he left. The next version, picking up late 20s, we're starting to get photographs on the front. We have this nice little tagline now, Roanoke College Life and Thought there at the top, which I would almost like to see that come back into vogue. Sort of identifies what a student newspaper should be about. Again, student newspaper should be the voice of the students more than anything else. But here we're starting to look a little bit more like a regular newspaper. We still have, well, we've gone to a 5-column front on this particular version. But you'll notice that there are a lot of different stories scattered across the page, covering quite a few different issues. I'm not sure if you can zoom in or not, but the headline on the second column is actually rather interesting. Half of students able to pass all of their work. There was a report, apparently a few enough students on campus at that particular time that they were able to get a midterm report that, you know, here at midterm, half of the students are passing all of their work. There's some statistics at the bottom of that column that 127 students have passed all of their courses. Is it 56 have failed one course, 46 failed two courses, and then it gets down to the bottom with 5 students having failed all of their courses. But story ends with the happy news that these are only the midterms, and you know, fairly confident that by the end of the term, all of the students will be in the good graces of the college. Okay, if we skip up a decade here, newspaper is starting to look a little bit more like a regular paper. We still have the Roanoke College Life and Thought tagline there. We have the news briefs going down the left of the page, getting more photographs in. Sometime between the last paper and this one, we started getting more women on campus. And so here they photographic evidence that there's women on campus now. Big news of the day, the frat starting to rush. And apparently there was some discussion about, and there was even when I came on campus in the 90s, some discussion about when was it proper to begin the rushing process for the fraternities. So apparently this has always been a big to-do. But the focus of the paper, oddly enough, kind of shifting from pretty much sports and social events and those kinds of things, and now kind of gravitating a little bit more on to the fraternities, kind of an extension of those social functions. Excuse me. The next one. This could have been the front page of any newspaper in the country in the 1940s. Nice professional looking photographs of guest speakers who were coming in. This particular case, it's toward the end of the year. We have, I think it's the college is going to award 15 degrees at the coming graduation, 1945. And of course, 1945 being at the very end of World War II, as you read the story, you see that most of the graduating seniors in 1945 were women, very few men still on campus. Most of them have been drafted away. But the page looks very professional, very much like, again, as I said at the very beginning, almost any newspaper in the country at the time. And that look persists for a fairly long time. We can go on to the next one. This is 1976. We have the focus is on the student rather than the guest speakers. We have that kind of funky 70s Brackety-Ack title. The Roanoke College Life and Thought tagline has gone away. But it's beginning to go from being a professional looking paper to being more of a student looking paper. What's kind of interesting about this one is that it's talking about an older version of the radio station. I'm not sure how many radio stations Roanoke College has operated over the years. At least 2, at least this one, and at least the one that we have now that was chartered, what was it, some 10 years ago or so. If we go on to the next one. Again, very student oriented. Here we are in the 80s. The new gymnasium being completed here, the one down below Bast. I particularly liked this one because the solar wind statue out behind Miller is taking shape. and a nice little posed picture there, the thinker in front of the solar wind. But again, really focused on what the students are doing on campus. And, again, a very student-centered newspaper here. I think there's one more. 94. Yeah, this is the semester that I came to campus. Mike Maxey is still listed as the advisor to the Brackety-Ack in this particular edition. But you notice that the page has shrunk a little bit. We have the Brackety-Ack masthead. We have the Roanoke College logo there beside the name. But basically, it's a one-story front. No longer trying to crowd an awful lot of information onto the front page. And so starting to look a little austere at that particular point, which is where I sort of want to pick up now with some copies of the paper that I brought with me. So we can get back here. Okay. So can't really see too terribly well, but this is 2001. It's a same size that the paper has been for an awful long time, kind of a relatively small paper. Again, not a terribly exciting layout here. A few little teasers along the side, one or two stories dominating the front. For some reason or another, as the decade went on, the newspaper shrank fairly dramatically. So now we have a much smaller layout and not an awful lot of content. This is an 8-page paper. 2014, this one is just a 4-pager. And so newspaper kind of struggling along a little bit, trying to find some content to fill. Something happens though, and we have never quite figured this out. But what happens is we go to a very strange format for a newspaper. Really long, really narrow. This particular one looks relatively professional, talking about issues of concern to the students. So Virginia Morell, who's the feature of the lead article here, well-recognized animal writer, and she had come to talk about animal rights and animal communication and those kinds of things. Interestingly enough, I had just used one of her books in one of my Com 301 classes, so particularly interesting to me. But this format doesn't really support a classic newspaper. And so what happened in the years following this, this one was 2016. 2017, the newspaper starts to get a little bit more of an artsy look to it. We're reliant a little bit more on the photographs, again, dealing with issues that are important. So we have the Confederate statue, we have the residence life issues and those kinds of things. But the page is starting to look a little bit more youthful, I think. Maybe one way of saying that. It no longer looks like any newspaper that you would see in a hometown newsstand, even despite the rather weird layout. So then students decide, we have this rather odd layout, let's play with it. So we end up basically with what we have now. It's a front page it's basically all art, teasers for the stories that are on the inside page. So in that sense, it's sort of like a magazine cover rather than a newspaper front page. lots of flash, lots of color we've got going on here. The newspaper is starting to grow again. This one is an 8-page paper. And basically that situation continues. Well, let's skip on. This is the latest one, the latest paper version of the paper. Basically the same kind of thing, very magazine oriented, very catchy graphics, lots of photographs of the students. And on one hand, again, as I said, it doesn't really look like the kind of newspaper that you would find in a city newsstand. But at the same time, newspaper industry is in an awful lot of flux these days. So classic newspapers are failing. People aren't reading them. For a long time, people were saying, well, you know, the young people just aren't reading newspapers anymore. And then people began to realize it's not just the young people. Nobody's reading newspapers anymore. And so the newspaper industry is going to have to reinvent what they're doing. And reinventing is not recapturing the old professional look that pretty much drove them to ruin. And so the newspapers are going to have to figure out some way to be relevant within their communities. And I'm rather convinced that the newspaper of the next 5, 10, 15 years will probably look a whole lot more like the Brackety-Ack now than today's version of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. And so our students are sort of on the cutting edge of modern journalism, maybe. Maybe it's a dead end. We'll have to see. That's one of the things about revolutions. We never know exactly how they're going to turn out. But I think it's kind of a hopeful sign that the students here are experimenting with things to see if they can gin up a little bit more readership of their students. So that's the basically the history of the Brackety-Ack. You want to go around and talk a little bit about how today's issue is coming into shape?
So, Kaylin.
Yes.
Dr. Carter, thank you so much for that little history lesson. I have so many questions personally.
Okay.
But we actually have a question and a couple comments from those that are viewing. So perhaps we start there.
Okay.
And then Kaylin, you can kind of walk us around again and look at layout. But so our first question came from Carrie Clark. And Carrie asked, how was the layout, et cetera, done in those very early years? Do you know do you have any insight? I mean, just how would they have done all that back in the 20s or 100 years ago?
X-Acto knives and hot wax machines. So I don't know exactly what kind of typesetting material they had available. But basically what you would do is, I guess they would take their stories to a print shop that was nearby. Maybe Roanoke College had its own print shop. It's actually a question more for Dr. Miller in the history department. But what would happen is that with the linotype machine or whatever it is they're using at the time, they would set up the galleys, run off paper strips, and those would get cut and placed on the page. And the hot wax machine would ideally help the galleys, as they were called, stick to the page. And then through some process, depending on what technology they had at the time, the newspapers would then get translated onto a plate that would be put on the press and then turn out the papers from there. So it was labor intensive to a certain degree. The first newspaper I worked with back in the 1980s was still a hot wax X-Acto knife kind of operation. And it was, it could get really, really frustrating. You end up having to redesign a page. Instead of just moving things around on the computer, you had to tear up the story from the page. You had to cut it into different shapes and then hope there was enough wax to stick them back on the shape that they needed to be in, and then hope that they stayed on the page when it got translated into a plate. If you look at old newspapers from almost anywhere from the 20th century on into the 1980s, 1990s, if you look at enough of them, you'll see all kinds of really weird things. Paragraphs missing, paragraphs in upside down, all kinds of weird things that happen as a result of the old X-Acto knives and hot wax machines.
Thank you so much. So I'm thrilled to share with you all that we have a few of our former editors with us. We have a shout out to David Hendricks. David was managing editor of the Brackety-Ack in 70 and 71. Jenny Carroll was editor from 1985 to 86. And she said, I am sure everything is much more high tech now. I have fond memories of my time there. David, excuse me, David, I'm not quite sure how to say your last name, Drebes or Drebes, editor-in-chief for calendar year 2003, active with the paper during his whole tenure. It sounds like from 2001 to 2005. So thank you for doing this, he said. Wayne Jordan was chief photographer from 74 to 77 and editor-in-chief. His last year. George Kegley was co-editor in 1949. So this is just super fun. We're having lots of our former editors, Kaylin, who are joining us today. So I will say there was another question. Let me scroll back up, I think. Let me look here. Bear with me. David said in 1971, the content was taken to the Times Register. Mm-hmm. They would type it on strips of paper, which was then placed on the layout using wax on the background. Headlines were printed on strips. So thank you for sharing that. So
the old headliner.
Oh, go ahead.
There was a machine called a headliner. It was a great big keyboard with keys on them that had an awful lot of play, but it didn't have a display. So you had to write the headline 5 or 6 times and then print them out and see which one of them you actually spelled everything correctly.
So a question for Kaylin and somewhat for Dr. Carter as well. Dr. Carter, playing off, you said that the student paper should be the student's voice that serves its purpose. So Kaylin, how do you all as students approach what the news content is going to be each week? And do you feel like you all have seen an evolution from, I know Dr. Carter, you mentioned there we could see an evolution where it was very news oriented and then it was kind of getting a little more artsy and lifestyle, or it started sports, you said at the beginning. So we would love to hear from Kaylin just how you all approach what the content's going to be.
So I think it helps that we have such a big staff. We have 6 editors in addition to myself, but then our whole entire staff is made up of 25 people, including reporters and photographers. So we have a very large staff, and our staff is involved with a lot of different things. We have athletes on our staff. We have people involved with theater. We have people involved with honor societies and service organizations. We're spread out across a wide range of majors. And so we cover a lot of ground, and therefore we have connections in a lot of different areas on campus. And so we're able to reach out to students regarding certain events or interview students. And we really do try to focus on doing student profiles as much as we can. That's what this top picture is. We have a folk of Noke every issue. And that was started a couple years ago when Emma Grosskopf was editor-in-chief. And so that was run by Shamira James. She was really all about getting students involved with the paper that weren't on staff. And so that has kind of carried on with my mindset. And so I think if students are involved with the Brackety-Ack, they're more likely to read the Brackety-Ack because people want to see pictures of themselves or they want to read about themselves. And so we try to get student voices in the paper as much as we can. And that has also helped with the addition of the culture and wellness page, the folks at Noke page, including the folk of Noke, and then the lifestyle page. So those kind of get a little bit more student voices and they can be a little bit more fluffy articles as opposed to the more straightforward news articles. But even with the more straightforward news articles, we do try to interview students to get their opinions. Because obviously, despite us being a large staff, we still only represent a small portion of the campus. So we try to get as many voices in the paper as we can that aren't ours.
Kaylee, how often do you interject like national news or news beyond the campus? Do you ever do that, or is it something you all avoid on purpose, or how do you address that?
So first dibs kind of goes to on-campus news stuff, but especially when there are big events going on in the world, I feel like it's important to include those because I don't feel like we would be a newspaper if we didn't include those. And so when the election was going on, we had some coverage of that. Obviously, when COVID first started, we had coverage on that, but we try not to overwhelm some of those big ticket articles with the entirety of the paper. So the news page still has a campus feel because we'll include 3 other articles that are campus related. So we do have a politics column on the news page right now, and that covers a lot of news things, especially obviously in the political realm. But then also when there are big events going on, we do an article to cover them. And then the other 2 articles will cover on campus things.
Great, thank you. I want to go back to some of our audience questions and comments. First one to note, we've had some questions from Carrie Clark. I wanted to note that Carrie was copy editor, opinion writer, and occasional reporter from 2007 to 2009. And Carrie asked the question, I see there's online version now. How long has that been around? And when did you all make that transition?
Go ahead.
It has been around for as long as I've been around, but obviously that's only 4 years. I am under the impression that it was fairly new when I arrived, maybe even with Emma. I think David Hall, the editor previous to Emma, had some form of a website, but I do think that is definitely within the last 10 years that we've been using a website.
Yeah, since maybe even the past 20 years or so, the paper has had some kind of an online presence. But it starts out, it's just a place where people can go to and see PDFs or screenshots of the pages that are getting published. I think it's only been fairly recently, the past 6 or 8 years, that and just more recently than that, like just the past 3 or 4 years, that the paper has gone to bi-weekly paper publication and filling in with online original publication between the paper editions.
And that was one of my questions was, has the frequency of the print paper evolved over time? The frequency of it, did it used to be weekly and now it's twice a month, or has it always been 2 times a month?
No, it was weekly for, and again, I don't remember exactly when the switchover was, but it was weekly until fairly recently. Again, just do you remember weekly?
Yeah, well, so this was like the year before I got here that it was weekly. And so when Emma became editor-in-chief, she extended the paper to 8 pages. It used to be 6. And that was when it was weekly. And then when she moved it to 8 pages, that's when it became bi-weekly.
So about how many copies are printed today? Jenny Carroll just asked that question.
Pre-COVID, we were printing 500 copies. So that's enough for a fourth of the campus to get an individual copy. But we do try to distribute more in common spaces, like common areas in the dorm or in common areas of academic buildings. But now with COVID, we're actually printing closer to 300 just because not as many students are on campus. So that way we're not wasting copies.
Mm-hmm.
When I first came to campus, the press run was about 1,000 copies, and almost every academic building on campus had a little box near their front door for Brackety-Ack distribution. And so we actually had a distribution manager when the papers would come back onto campus from Salem Times Register, wherever they're getting printed. That distribution manager would go around with a whole bunch of copies and stick a dozen or so in each of those boxes all around campus. And then the leftovers would get piled up near Commons so people could pick them up on their way to breakfast or lunch or supper, or whatever.
So David mentioned that there was he said, not so good website in 2002 or so. It sounds like that's seen a big dramatic transformation. So thank you, David. So David asked another question, I think it's part of a bigger conversation. So his question is, have the current staff been involved in any controversies related to their content? And I think that also just kind of makes me think of a broader question, perhaps conversation about how much liberties you all feel like you have in sharing whatever voice you want to from an editorial standpoint versus a news standpoint. So Kaylin, do you want to try to address David's question? And
I will jump in just real quickly and say, I've really missed that there has not been any big controversies lately. I don't think they're doing their job if they don't stir up trouble every now and then.
There you go. There you go.
So we are a student-run paper. We're independent from the college. And that's something that Dr. Carter does have to remind me of whenever I bring potentially controversial topics to mind. And so we do have the freedom to talk about whatever we would want, just like a normal paper would. But at the end of the day, I ethically want to make sure we are representing Roanoke College well, representing the faculty and staff well. And so, and I believe that the entire staff wants to do the same thing. So we haven't really created a lot of controversy as far as topics.
Shame on you.
There have been a few minor incidences where staff members haven't liked the way things have been worded. And so we just fixed those things. They obviously weren't intentional or anything like that. And sometimes they get slipped in the midst of all of the editing and layout process that goes on. But again, those were very minor things that weren't really necessarily controversial. It was just the wording could have been a little more clear. So as far as like political controversy or anything like that, we also haven't created any headway with that. Right now, it's obviously a very sensitive time in the news. And so at the beginning of the year, we had a chat with the staff as a whole on how to report ethically and truthfully and make sure you're giving the whole side of every story and to watch your wording, just because there are a lot of big topics in the year 2020 and even going into 2021. So we are trying to be mindful of that and mindful of how things can come across.
One of my all-time favorite controversies, though, was it was the edition that came out on the Friday just before Parents Weekend. And so campus was getting flooded by parents. And the big headline across the top of the Brackety-Ack was students favor condom machines in dormitories.
That's great. So Kaylin, I'm guessing you've never been asked to visit President Maxey's office Is what you're telling me. Dr. Carter, has that happened, do you think, in the history? I mean, where the editor is getting a little private time with administration or not?
The last time the editor and I got called into the president's office was when Sabine O'Hara was president. So that was a very narrow and easily definable period in college history. But what had happened was that the college had been going through a fairly intense period of trying to mend town-gown relationships, and especially with the Salem Police Department.
Mm-hmm.
The paper continued to carry a couple of stories, though, talking about students complaining that they were getting not harassed, but kind of pestered by Salem police officers. And so we got called into the president's office, and Dr. O'Hara presented us with all this information about, the number of police reports involving students has gone way down over the past few years, and so on and so forth. And finally, I had to remind her, the kind of things they're talking about aren't the kind of things that are going to show up in a police report. These are just, cops showing up, seeing somebody walking around at night, and kind of asking if they're drunk or worse, depending on who the student is. And she finally had to say, well, the students have legitimate complaint there.
So apparently, David said that was him.
Oh.
So, a little disclosure there. Thanks for sharing that, David. So we have a just totally different type of question that came in. Can any student from any major run for editor now? I was a sociology major. We didn't have communications back then. So is there any criteria for tying a student's major to being able to be editor?
Not at all. Any student can apply.
Great. So that's all the questions that we had so far from the audience. Kaylin, what do you want to do next? Do you want to take us around briefly and show us a little bit?
Yeah, we have 3 editors still with us. And so people are finishing up, which is always a good thing, especially since we've been here since 2:30. So it is around the time where some people might be finishing up, but we also still have several more hours to go. I will go around and introduce you guys a little bit more thoroughly to the 3 editors who are left, and they can explain their pages, because as it turns out, 2 of the 3 pages are some of the fairly new ones. And then one of them, entertainment, is always loved by everyone. So we'll go around and kind of more thoroughly do a little introduction. Behind me, you can see the Media Hall of Fame. So that's where some of the people watching might be pictured. So here is Zach again.
Hi, I'm Zach. I'm a senior. I'm the folks at Noke editor and the in-house layout. What's my layout designer? I'm making up my title as I go. Layout designer for the news page. And this issue for folks at Noke, Kaylin and I talked about it, and she came up with the idea of, since it's National or International Women's History Month. Is it national or international?
I think it's national, but maybe international.
It's Women's History Month, nonetheless. We're actually doing something new in which we're covering multiple folks at Noke, or folks of Noke. We have 3 women on campus who are doing some pretty remarkable things. One is a track, without giving too much away, you'll have to read it, but one is a track athlete, one is a diversity chair, and the other is a faculty member. I won't tell you who, but you'll find out tomorrow. And then we have a section that's pretty cool called Maroon's Talk, in which one of our staff reporters goes around and asks questions about campus and what people are thinking. So that's going to be pretty cool. And then a nice little column about just like self-care and all that, and just kind of a reflection. It's a very reflective piece. And then in terms of news, we got news. I prefer laying out folks at Noke more than I do for news, because it's hard to make news entertaining or make it look pretty when there's so much to report, as we've mentioned. But yeah, that's what this issue is. Bye.
Thank you.
Next, we have Joyelle, and she is Culture and Wellness, which, like I said, is one of the newer pages, so she can talk about that a little bit more.
Hi, I'm Joyelle. I'm the editor of the Culture and Wellness section, and I also do social media for the Brackety-Ack as well. I started as a second semester of my sophomore year. I started writing for the opinion page and took over as editor for the Culture and Wellness section this last semester this year. And our section primarily, we cover a lot of different topics. We cover mental health, we cover food, we cover exercise. That was actually, so the page was originally food and wellness, and we actually changed it to culture and wellness so that we could cover a little bit wider variety of topics. So some sort of sneak peek of what is to come in this issue. We have some ways to enjoy nature since we have spring coming up. Specifically, we're going to be talking a little bit about NOs, which is a type of hammock that a lot of people use on campus. So I'm excited for that. And yeah, I think it's a really good addition to the Brackety-Ack.
You want to show here? I'll try and show them some of your page.
Let me see if I can turn the brightness down and maybe they'll be able to see it better.
If not, that's okay.
That's
Maybe we'll come
hard
back.
to see.
Yeah, I think so too. All right, so down here we have Carissa, and she is finishing up.
Hi there. So I'm the entertainment editor. I've been, I think, since last semester. And I was writing for the entertainment page before I became editor, since first semester freshman year. So I'm a junior now. I'm creative writing major, so not really in the journalism, but in the journalism vein as much. But I have been really grateful to be a part of the paper and get to learn a whole lot about like news and how the paper works. And in this issue, we have kind of like Kaylin was talking about, where we try to highlight both national news as well as putting an emphasis on what's happening on campus. So for the top article, we are covering the play that the theater, the Roanoke College Theater Group just put on. So we have a review from a student who went, or a staff reporter who attended the performance and wrote a review of it. Then we have coverage of the newest Marvel TV series that just premiered, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So we have a little review, kind of sneak peek of that. We had the Grammy Awards that just happened on Sunday, so we have a recap of that. And then a little slightly more of an opinion piece, which I wrote actually, about Disney films, Disney love stories versus Studio Ghibli romances. So that we cover like a wide variety of things, from like book reviews, movies, television and plays. So almost anything that falls under that big entertainment umbrella might be on our page.
Perfect.
Great.
So I believe maybe Sally mentioned earlier, I am lifestyle editor, and that is also one of the newer pages. And so on that is definitely very much so the magazine-like page of the paper. And so it's definitely a little bit more fluffier. This week, with April Fool's Day coming up next week, we have an article for some prank ideas. We also have an article written, what to do if you're not an NCAA basketball fan during this time. So that's kind of a fun piece. And then we also have my column, which is called 22 Things. I recently turned 22 and I love Taylor Swift. So I do a piece every week or every issue where I do 22 thoughts regarding a certain topic. And then we also have a piece on like, because concerts are starting back up. And so we have a what to bring to concerts COVID edition. So that's a little bit of a sneak peek of what this week's Brackety-Ack looks like in some of our newer pages.
Well, that was super fun for us to get to meet some of the other staff and get a little more insight into how they approach their roles. I think a few people are in awe of the space that you're in. There's some comments about, well, we were in a little hole in an office shared with the yearbook. So if I'm correct, that's the Garrett, used to be the Garrett meeting room, but it's now a student room, correct, in the Colquitt Center. So do you all reserve that every time in order to be able to do all of your layout design? Because normally students can come in there and study and use the computers or meet as organizations too.
I do let the info desk know our layout schedule, so that way they have it on their calendar. However, as far as officially reserving it, with COVID and everything, you haven't really been able to officially reserve a room because students are supposed to have the opportunities to go to other study rooms. However, I don't really mind if there are students in here while we are working, but I do let them know that we're the Brackety-Ack and we're laying out the paper and that we are going to have to talk. So if they want to be in a setting where it needs to be quiet, it may not be the best place for them. And then also to be mindful that we are working and we're doing our job. And so if they're going to be super loud, I would prefer if they're in a different room. Mm-hmm. But because of just the environment we're in, I try to be understanding that students want to be in here too, just as long as we get the computers, because we do have a very large space, but because of everybody having to social distance, we actually only get to use 4 of the 7 computers that we have. And like I mentioned earlier, we have 6 editors plus myself. So if you do the math, that kind of makes it a little bit hard if another student is in here wanting to use the computers.
Right. So as we're wrapping up, I'm so curious, I bet our viewers are as well, about the Hall of Fame behind you, the Media Hall of Fame. Can you walk us a little closer so that we can see what you're talking about? That sounds really interesting. So, it's been a while since I've been in there, so I don't think I knew that was there.
So in order to be part of the Media Hall of Fame, you have to be involved with at least 3 of the media outlets on Roanoke College's campus. That includes the Brackety-Ack, it includes the radio show, it includes the Basically Tarantino Film Festival that we have. It could also include sports media, like doing announcing. Some of you might remember Elijah Wilhelm. He is up here and he was definitely known for being the voice of Roanoke College. And so seniors get nominated to be up there, and then your picture will get to be up here forever.
That's fantastic. Well, Kaylin and Dr. Clark, is there anything else that you'd want to share with us today as we close our time? I think this has been fascinating, and I think it's just been a load of fun to spend time with you all and get a little history lesson as well as a little more insight into this great aspect of our campus.
I think the only thing I would add is that the freedom that Roanoke College gives its students and the student publications is remarkable. The student media policy, very first statement, is that the students have, it quotes the First Amendment and then says students have full First Amendment rights. As a private institution, it doesn't have to do that. The college the college is technically the publisher of the newspaper. And as a private institution, it can exercise its right to be the de facto editor as well. But the policy states very, very clearly that the students have their First Amendment rights and that student media are designed to be the voice of the students. And so it's very much a hands-off kind of thing in terms of faculty. I get questions all the time about, how could you let the Brackety-Ack kids do that? I'm not the editor. I'm the advisor. I can tell them I wouldn't do that if I were you, or you're not doing enough of that, or whatever it happens to be. But the final say about what goes into the paper is her.
Well, thank you. That's a really great way for us to wrap up. And I just think this must be an amazing experience to add to your resume. All of you to be able to take to whatever comes next for you. So congratulations on all your hard work and what you do for the students on campus. And thanks for spending time with us. We really
Thank
do.
you for
appreciate
having us. It really
Thanks
is.
for doing this.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity. I never turned down an opportunity to showcase the Brackety-Ack and to brag about the Brackety-Ack and to help inform people of how and where they can get copies of the Brackety-Ack or see it online. So.
And that it exists.
Yes. Yeah, that's something that I'm still learning, that even my friends don't know that the Brackety-Ack exists. And I'm just like, I talk about it all the time.
Exactly. My goodness. Well,
So,
thank you all. And to our viewers that joined us today, thank you so much for spending this hour with us on Thursday afternoon. And we hope that you'll tune in to all our future NOKELive events as they come up. We do them quite frequently, and you can go to roanoke.edu/alumni to find links to previously recorded NOKELive events and see what's coming. And for any of our alumni that have joined us today, I hope that you will join us for Alumni Weekend Virtual Edition, beginning April 15th through the 17th. Registration is live on our website, and I know that you will be pleasantly surprised with an incredible schedule of events, from highlighting lectures to fun social gatherings. And I think you'll see some familiar favorites from Alumni Weekend and some new events to spark your curiosity and bring all our Maroons together from home. And we look forward to seeing you on campus next year for Alumni Weekend. So until next NOKELive, thank you all so much. Stay well and stay safe, Maroons.
thank you.
Bye.